We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Take your own advice.
What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No delusion!
Shit's getting way too complicated for me.
Welcome to the Antidote. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
All right. It is Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. And Jeremy, we're going to get some more into factors and circumstances around the events of October 7th and their aftermath, more in the direction of narrative discourse shaping, both, I think, domestically and some geopolitical elements. And we're going to cover something. We're going to talk about something that has really come up in the last few days involving Representative Nancy Pelosi and the group Code Pink, with Nancy Pelosi alleging that Code Pink serves as a front, basically foreign funding, and is basically a foreign funded group that is participating in glorification of Hamas.
Well,
and
actually, Greg, it wouldn't have been such an uproar if she'd actually said that, and actually directly named Code Pink, because she didn't. She sort of just said some of these protesters, basically.
Good point. You're right. And then Code Pink took the lead in responding that these are outrageous accusations, and Nancy Pelosi herself's covering for her own upholding and her own support for obvious foreign government that has a vested interest in the pushing propaganda that leads to destruction in Palestine, and this, of course, it creates kind of a sordid mess, as we're going to talk about here. But beneath the obvious problems with Pelosi, one of the really one of the public enemies number one when it comes to the problems with our political system and the corruption of government in terms of obvious, serious foreign compromise in a very Israeli direction. And then also then you get into some of the nuances surrounding the state of anti-war, anti-imperialism, both before and after 10/7. I mean, this is stuff that's gone on for a long time here. So we'll try to delve into, some of the nuanced realities that surround this in terms of, and then even areas where ultimately, is there at some deeper level, maybe some type of, maybe not even consciously cognizant to a lot of people, some type of ultimate, very sordid, strange bedfellows, even kind of horseshoe of certain narrative enforcement and setting up here. So we'll get into that. But I feel like this is very instructive, because we've wanted to get into the topic, of Code Pink and The Nation magazine, and we've also got this recent James Bamford article for The Nation, Why Israel Slept, which deals with this, said to deal with failures leading to October 7th and all of this. So it's a good catalyst. I think it's it's important conversation. This probably won't be the only time we focus in on this, but we wanted to get into some of these matters with some of these parties, such as Code Pink and related entities. So this is a good, I think, launching ground into that with this, with what is, this Code Pink taking the, the initiative, it was Code Pink at the forefront of responding. It wasn't a specific calling out of Code Pink, but it's Code Pink taking this direct, role in directly responding to the outrageousness of these claims by Pelosi. So,
yes, and the larger geopolitical context of this domestic uproar around things like protest and the questions of the First Amendment, and obviously the hearkening back to questions of the Cold War and anti-war protests during that, in terms of the questions of Soviet influence. And so there's a lot of that kind of repetition to something like, 50 years ago, which of course is very interesting in terms of the context of the October 7th operation and attacks, that was the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. As you pointed out, Greg, it's also the last year was the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Likud party. And then, as you just recently, as we were speaking before we started recording, pointed out to me again, the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Heritage Foundation, which is really, I think, where we begin to see some of the origins in the American domestic political context, especially in terms of conservatism and the right, and especially what has become of the MAGA right and the anti-woke culture war, a deep component, as we've identified these twin pillars, really, of these sort of like global clean break kind of programs that we've seen over especially the last 50 years, coming to a head in the 21st century, of the global terror war, or the war on terror, amped up after 9/11, and then the global culture war, really amped up in many ways by post 11/9, which is what our shorthand is for the operation to not only help install Trump, but also to engage a destabilization, clean break culture war against the American body politic itself, in terms of destabilization, things like that might have been, talked about as hyper-normalization, and then sort of set that American body politic that's been destabilized against itself. And so there is this, 50-year resonance going on that we're in the immediate wake of, I think, that harkens back to October 7th. And then this other little very interesting piece of the anniversary, October 7th, not only the Yom Kippur War, with it then lined up with Simchat Torah, which is why, I title it the Simchat Torah terror treason war plot. But it was also Vladimir Putin's birthday, October 7th. And there have even been articles written from the Hill all the way to Israeli technology press and geopolitical press around the Hamas gift to Putin in terms of October 7th. And of course, all of this leaves out what's really so obvious in terms of Likud, Netanyahu, this what Jeffrey Blankford called in 2015, the Putin-Netanyahu or Putin-Bibi bromance.
Yep, bromance, yeah.
And for a while I was like highlighting on Twitter X these pictures in these high-rise apartment buildings in Israel that Netanyahu was using for his re-election campaign, where on one side of the building you have the banner of Netanyahu and Trump. It's sort of a little bit in tatters. It's sort of been weathered, and as we know, the public relationship between Netanyahu and Trump got way more bristly in public after Trump was gone. And Trump, using swear words against Netanyahu that leaked out, and all of that kind of thing. And then on the other, 90 degrees, separate face of that high-rise apartment building, you see Netanyahu and Putin in a very friendly embrace. That was a crucial marketing piece for Netanyahu's reelection, appealing to this very, very Russian, Russophilic and Russian refugees to Israel. And there's that whole deeper background that the growth of Likud as a party after its founding, which was really sort of pushed in the 80s as almost like a pseudo-populist, very like we've talked about, it's sort of like a MAGA version an Israeli MAGA version of some sort, like the working man's populist party against these liberal globalists, UN weak on Hamas types, that kind of thing. And that is the growth of Likud, and the way that it grew in terms of population transfer was as there was these massive movements of Russians and Russian Jews, but not necessarily all. Like there's lots of questions about actual, with this what's determined to be an ethnos state, or as Caroline Glick Freudian slipped, the Jewish demographic state. Oh, I mean the Jewish democratic state. So you would think that there would be a lot of questions about whether all of these Russians who came in are actually Jewish, and most of them are, and that was sort of the setup. And we've gone over. There's this sort of really deep, covert history of the eastern side of the Robert Maxwell operation, going on at the very similar kind of time where Maxwell was amplifying his American operations with his Senate asset, John Tower, using Tower to get the Israeli Trojan horse backdoored promise software into the heart of the U.S. nuclear weapons laboratories, mainly focused around, New Mexico, Los Alamos, Sandia, and that aspect. And at the same kind of time, Maxwell is deeply engaged with this Eastern Front, and specifically with the Semyon Mogilevich, the brainy Dawn of Dawns of the Russian organized crime syndicate, that, by the way, also has been implicated in the compromise and turning of a figure like Viktor Orban, who, by the way, Donald Trump took time out of his speech in New Hampshire to recognize this very strong leader in Europe. Some people don't like him because he's a strong man. He's too much of a strong man. Some people don't like a strong man, but that's what we really want here, don't we? Is a strong man.
Which I find interesting because, this would be something to dig more into. But what we've noticed is that between like elements of the right, MAGA, that are still wary of directly embracing Putin, which I think ultimately is like basically, there's a lot of Russian, active measures and other stuff going on and co-opting going on within like some of these circles, that Orban kind of takes the place as like a proxy through groups such as, CPAC and other elements of even Tucker Carlson to a large extent, or a figure like some of these American national conservatism types, guy Rod Dreher at the American Conservative magazine. So Orban serves as a proxy for some elements that are still like where it's pretty obvious there's some very, very effective Russian co-opting taking place, but are still wary of completely embracing Putin. So, I just point that out because I think that's, I think that's relatively significant thing to think about and take into consideration is Orban in Hungary serving as like a proxy for Putin. And then also even in some areas, like in that Twitter space you were on, X space you were on with Nick Fuentes and others, Orban is used as like, well, no, see, actually, he's totally co-opted by Netanyahu, so that's why there's weakness around immigration and all this. I mean, it's a bit of a mess, but I think there's a pretty clear, like, Orban is like a proxy for Putin in some circles.
And throughout the Trump years, we more and more identified Hungary, the Budapest Bridge analysis out of Hungarian-Canadian analyst, where Hungary is not only maybe the geopolitical epicenter of this Netanyahu-Putin axis, but it was very likely actually the logistical headquarters for some of the human intelligence operations that were being run in conjunction with probably both the Brexit operation in the European sphere, but then also definitely the 11/9 Trump operation. And you see, London, the UK was the epicenter of things like more like the data operations, obviously Cambridge Analytica. We know all of these, that London, the city of London specifically, is this really strong epicenter of like dual citizen, or some of them are, more than dual citizen. Someone like maybe a Leonard Blavatnik. I think maybe he's just a dual citizen of the UK and the United States, but he's a major Israeli player, and he ties in directly to very core Russian oligarch spheres, including the Alpha Bank oligarchs and even Viktor Vekselberg. And there's this very deep background there of someone like a Leonard Blavatnik type, that there's a very strong connection to the UK. But there's also, the Cengiz, Vincent Cengiz, and a bunch of different, like very Israeli-oriented oligarchs operating out of the UK. It's also the epicenter, obviously, of the Russian oligarchs, and some of the Russian oligarchs also then operate on this axis from the city of London down to, Israel, and specifically the West Bank, for example, like Roman Abramovich, where it came out that Roman Abramovich was the major seed funder, $100 million of the very early years of these key organization that was operating in the West Bank using sort of archaeology and tourism as a guise to pursue basically lawfare and the taking away of Palestinian property in the West Bank, the Judification of the West Bank, as has been being ramped up over years and years now. And that someone like Roman Abramovich, who some people have called Putin's purse in a UK context. Now, he's denied that there's this working connection with Putin and all of that. And obviously, I think that was the one point where Catherine Belton, who wrote Putin's People, they got sued. She and her publisher got sued, and this was one of the points that they had to, I think, issue not quite an apology, but a redress of the specific language that was used around Roman Abramovich's role in the UK. So all of that as a tangent to understand this very interesting axis, I think, in a European context between Hungary, and specifically Budapest, and then the UK and the city of London, where the city of London and the UK were more generally serving as the headquarters for the data analytics, the data warfare, the psychometric, psychographical warfare component of both the Brexit and the 11/9 Trump operation, while Hungary, and Budapest specifically, was the actual meeting place. And you'll see, like, there were certain key Trump operatives who went to Budapest multiple times just during the campaign. And it's been well recognized that Budapest is a key locus in a similar way that the Netherlands, and specifically Schiphol Airport, I think that's in Amsterdam, is notoriously known as the logistics hub of Mossad, Israeli intelligence in Europe. It's been well known that Hungary is the headquarters of Russian human intelligence operations in Europe. And so I think you're right, Greg, that the Tucker Carlson types, the Trumps types, they use CPAC, obviously, as you pointed out. They use Viktor Orban's Hungary and Viktor Orban himself almost as a proxy or a dog whistle for this Putin connection and this Putin reverence of some sort that was so obvious with Trump.
Right.
And remember that
And
infamous moment at Helsinki after this private closed-door meeting with Putin, where it seemed to be there was a lot of concern about American translators having access to this private meeting, and Trump leaves the meeting and says, Putin, he loves BB. He loves him some BB. And that's a good thing for all of us. He loves Israel.
Yeah, and and on that note, Hungary as a proxy, like CPAC had conferences, I believe, in 2023 in Hungary and in Israel. So you notice what's left out of there with Russia, and of course CPAC with former head of the American Conservative Union prior to Matt Schlapp and all of his scandalistic behavior, to say the least, was David Keene of the National Rifle Association and Washington Times, which is right at the epicenter of the Maria Butina and other names in terms of spheres of influence that go into areas even going more in the direction of potentially the Center for National Interest via someone such as oh God, name's escaping me, Jeremy. I can't believe the name's escaping me.
Dmitry
Maurice Greenberg.
Oh, Maurice
Greenberg.
AIG.
Yeah. The alleged courting of
the money
connections there, right?
Via what's the guy's name? Tor something. The Russian
Alexander Torshin.
Torshin, that's right.
Yeah, and so this right there goes right into those circles of like right at the head of almost like right at the heart of like of direct, I would say, like, foreign compromising. And then once again, through the twin pillars of the terror war and culture war, which I think have aligned these interests more for longer term in addition to the short term. So like, yeah, I think there's a clear case to be made for that like you still have some plausible deniability around, see, we're not Russian shows. We're not praising Putin while we're just defending, pushing all the narratives about why doing anything for Ukraine is going to lead to World War III, while we embrace his proxy Orban as the model for what we should be.
And it's very interesting because the model is almost perfectly, almost a perfect analog in terms of what Trump is referencing when some people don't like him because he's too strong. He's a strong man. And what he's really pointing to is two aspects that really resonate intensely with this culturally weaponized base of MAGA, which of course is, and we'll talk about this more moving forward, the question of immigration, the southern border, right? So that was where Orban staked his claim as a strongman. He's keeping out the immigrants, right? Who, in Trump's term, would poison the blood. What was it? Poison the blood of the country, that kind of thing. And then the other side of it, obviously, is this pseudo anti-war position that these networks take, especially in relationship to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, in terms of Orban appears to be this major stickler trying to hold up certain military support from the European sphere to the Ukrainians. And it's come out that in the case, let's say, that Ukraine as a nation state does not survive the Russian invasion, that Hungary and Orban are making certain claims to the western parts of it. And of course, there's these long meetings with the Belarusian leader, who's that, Lukashenko? No, is that his name? I can't remember. But there's a lot of very recent high-level Russian, Belarusian conversations going on right now. And so there's this question right now of what all then happens in terms of Russia, Ukraine. So it's those two are the twin pillars, I think, of this idea that Trump is dog whistling at in terms of Viktor Orban being a strong man and too strong for some people. And then obviously he's just directly appealing to the authoritarian archetype that he continues to use as his banner for the Trump base as he moves forward, as this just man who's too strong for the deep state, and they try to get him down, and all of these accusations against him are made up by the Obama Soros deep state types. And I think recently Trump doubled down on his statement about Putin, trusting Putin over the 11/9 operation, the 2016 election interference operation that we now know. It's sort of it should be notoriously known that the totality of the evidence points to an axis of foreign interests that really began getting together after the yacht, after Netanyahu storms the Capitol against Obama in 2015 around the Iran deal. Obviously, now that's right back on the table with the geopolitical moment and the recent attack on the American base in that corner region, I think of Jordan, Syria, Iraq, right in the corner there, where it's still not known exactly, sort of solidified which base it was, that kind of thing. And so this Iran question is obviously right back on the table, and you have the entire litany of the Lindsey Graham types saying, take it to Tehran, bomb Iran, back to John McCain kind of scenario. So they're trying to seize their moment. And remember, that's what when Netanyahu really, I think, opened up the first blow of the early 11/9 operation, is when he stormed the Capitol, invited in by the GOP around the Iran deal. And then just final thing is, of course, that's what Trump said, that the main reason, the original reason he got into the race was because of the bad Iran deal.
And I think there's a bit of a terror war, culture war horseshoe with even Trump, in his initial campaign launch it was the Iran deal. It's the worst deal ever. We have to destroy it. And remember his big deal about, well, I'm sure there's some good people who come across our border, but they're mostly criminals and drug smugglers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I see a horseshoe there with like terror war, culture war dynamics, all while he's also able to effectively play the role of like the anti-war mavericks. I mean, it's very interesting. But then circling back to even the 2015, the March 2015 storming of the Capitol by Netanyahu, and one difference between then and now is that the Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, lesser extent Ted Cruz, because he's always been kind of with this other much more culture war destabilization friendly wing. Now is that the Lindsey Graham types are totally in bed with the cultural and the domestic destabilization, in addition to the traditional saber rattling, warmongering against the enemies of America and the terroristic threats. So, I mean, it's like a bit of a different. It's a different environment in that regard now, to where so many of the types who just before were like your more standard hawkish neocon terror war talking points have now just been totally brought into this culture side of things through like the compromising of the MAGA operation, whatever has been used against the likes of Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio, whatever quote unquote moderate positions they once seemed to have when it came to like some of these domestic issues now have just gone to the wayside. And I think that's pretty significant, because it really speaks volumes about the shift in tone of like where the our domestic politics have gone. So I think now it's like it's even more heightened because of the combination of the bringing of the usual foreign, Lindsey Graham being the worst example of this, I think, or maybe the best symbolic example of how this seems to work, of the usual saber rattling, warmongering, with now like somebody who now is just a changed person with a much different 180 in terms of like the being for the domestic warfare side of things.
That's a very important point, actually, because I think that this moment is a very important example of when you get the hybrid warfare of the terror war and the culture war combined, and that is definitely going on right now. They have been ramping up. It's very interesting. Like they even had like these FBI folks, Homeland Security folks going on the record about how there's this massive threat, about how, Hamas and Iranian operatives are coming in via the southern border, and that we should basically expect some kind of new 9/11 in the United States. You even had like certain Israeli activists on the record basically saying maybe we need another 9/11 for you Americans to understand that we are the tip of the spear in terms of these nasty Islamist savages that we're just sort of holding back in many ways. And so that is part of it. There is this very almost a synergistic in a negative, I would say, way uh, relationship between the culture war dynamics of, the pollution of the blood, as Trump then dog whistles to like the Jared Taylor wing of MAGA, some of the Groyper wing of MAGA, in relationship to the immigration question, and then the terror war. And remember, there was this sort of series of events both in the United States and around the world, that seemed to sort of follow the Trump campaign in many ways. And he worked off of that really, really intensely, obviously, like things like the San Bernardino attacks, the Pulse nightclub attack, which was then, remember there was this whole culture war. This was a gay nightclub in Florida, and the Islamist terrorists attacked the gay nightclub, and this was around the same time that Trump was, or at least Trump then was the Trump campaign was making the case that they were, they were gay, they were the gay solidarity wing of the GOP in many ways, while also being the strong man against terrorism in certain ways.
Was it Gavin McInnes and Milo Yiannopoulos making the big deal of, we're free to be ourselves in America, and the intolerant Islamists won't let us, while also like obviously very, very clearly playing into like the usual tropes of like, why this is evil and all of this. So yeah, I think that was all going on around that time.
Yes, and there was, all of this, then there's forensics then if you needed to actually drill down on the nature of these events, obviously, that are a little bit too much to deal with one by one to some extent. But there was this, security contractor background there in terms of, I think Mateen was the perpetrator's name down in at the Pulse nightclub, and then you had the Bataclan theater attack in France, and all of this, seemed to be like sort of setting some kind. To me, in my eyes, I felt like it was setting the table in certain ways for this Trump operation. And so you see similar kinds of dynamics right now, I think, where you get this dirty merger of culture war and terror war. And then one other resonance of this moment, I think, is we're okay. So what happened in terms of this, what's being called an escalation, and that it's the first American service members who have been killed in the regional theater by an attack since October 7th, and since the United States government, backed Israel in terms of their operation and their ongoing, what's really obviously undergirding it is an ethnic cleansing. They're driving the Palestinians while destroying the North. They basically made it seem like, no, we're just going to sort of target the North and these major Hamas centers in the North, and you'll be safe in the South. And then they just keep on going and going, and they're basically just leveling Gaza while killing tens of thousands of people, including, very likely well over 10,000 children by this point, just over 100 days into this so-called war. And so This was a big moment then, and this is why I felt like almost like the timing of it was suspicious. My sense of, I told you this, Greg, that my sense of the timing of it was of this attack, and it looks like it was it was called Tower 22, I think, and it turns out that it's 3 African American service members, I think, from the Georgia National Guard. Okay. So there's more sort of culture war dynamics on top of that too, in the way that's being sort of pulled on by the libertarian anti-war folks, like and elements too. And that, it seemed to me, the timing of this attack seemed to set it up perfectly to be the main topic for the American Sunday morning talk shows, news talk shows. And it became that. And there are still some forensics questions, I think, that make, in my mind, bring this moment up as the inverse. We're sort of in the inverse situation of the early January 2020 Trump assassination of Qasem Soleimani and another IRGC associated commander, when they were in Iraq. And remember, right after that, there was this, between the assassinations and then the Iranian response, there was this very suspicious shoot down of a Ukrainian airliner leaving the Tehran airport. And I pretty quickly begin to figure out that the parameters were there for some kind of cyber attack or some kind of electronic warfare attack that potentially used the backdoor access to these Iranian Tor, I believe they were Tor M1 missiles that Iran had acquired from Russia. And there had been some Iranian chatter years before. Some of it came out in the it's in the WikiLeaks about how the Iranians were complaining to the Russians about how the Russians might have supplied these backdoor cyber access codes to their anti-aircraft missiles to the Israelis. All right, and so. And this came to me before it was even. There was questions about whether it was an explosion on board, whether it was a shoot down potentially by someone on the ground, like an MEK kind of person, or was it an Iranian missile? And it turned out that it was an Iranian Tor M1 system. That it looked, to this day, to me, it looks correct that the friend or foe ID system that sets up the targeting for these anti-aircraft missiles, which were on very high alert, obviously, because of this very high level assassination by the United States. And obviously the United States was expecting an Iranian response, got an Iranian response, but this was during it was sort of like in this in-between moment that we are now in terms of this post-Tower 22 attack that's being connected to IRGC or sort of regional Quds Force-backed proxies of some sort. That in between that, there was a lot of tension. And so Iranian anti-aircraft was on very, very high alert. And to this day, I believe that my hypothesis is very likely correct. Now, I don't know for sure whether it was the Israelis and some kind of like Unit 8200 or other like electronic warfare unit that did it via, very likely be something via an aircraft of some sort, like a fighter jet, or some of them can be deployed with these electronic warfare kind of apparati. But I'm almost positive that something like that is the explanation for why the Iranians mistakenly shot down a commercial airliner. And then the question of who was on board it, there were a lot of like Canadians, a lot of Iranian Canadians on board there who were scientists, and all of that. And then and I'll try to tie this up, but that just reminds me of what's going on now too, in terms of, we saw the targeting of the hospitals in Gaza by the Israelis. Of course, that first big one is the one that's still hanging there in the balance. It was started by the Anglicans. I think it's now run by the Baptists, but it was maybe the oldest hospital in the region. And the Israelis did all kinds of propaganda around it, and all of their Hasbara folks all the way through, like Ben Shapiro. I think to this day still have these posts up accusing people like Representative Rashida Tlaib of being sort of Hamas propagandists for basically saying what I think we now know to be the non-controversial truth, that it was an Israeli ordinance of some sort that went off at the hospital. And now the Israelis are basically, I think they're on the verge, or they have destroyed every single hospital maybe in Gaza. Now they're down into the southern region. And so then that is going on. And now they've also been targeting, of course, the universities, the intellectual base, I would say, of the Palestinian people, which is usually true. The part of the long-term Israeli propaganda in relationship to the Palestinians specifically has to do exactly what we're talking about, the culture war dynamics of the terror war, and making it seem like the Palestinians are just sort of bloodthirsty, crazy jihadists in total. And the reality is almost the opposite. Now, there is obviously a very strong, Muslim dedicated population, but there's also this very strong, almost ecumenical and widely based organic intellectual tradition amongst the Palestinians. And so I more and more see it as an Israeli stratagem to attack the civil society. And I think we've even just seen this now at Columbia University, by the way, where there was a skunk water, basically a low-level chemical warfare attack on Palestinian solidarity activists at Columbia University. Now, I haven't gone through all of the forensics, but it does begin to look like it was very likely or organized. The attack was organized by IDF veterans, potentially associated or in the area. And now it's being largely covered up by Columbia University, very likely at the behest of their big Zionist donors. And meanwhile, there's certain students and graduate students at Columbia who are more than a week out and still have the remnants of this chemical warfare spray, giving them headaches and making it hard for them to live their lives. Now, we know that this is what the Israelis do intensely in the West Bank. They'll sort of release, poop water into Palestinian areas. They have these sprays of like these skunk and dirty, really nasty sprays that they'll just go and spray Palestinian areas with. And now, so that's now come to, ground zero, Manhattan. And so there's this, I see this as now I think proven out stratagem of the Israeli warfare state, wherever it's operating, whether it's operating in Manhattan or whether it's operating in Iraq, or whether it's operating in Gaza, which is to target and try to destroy, and at the very least destabilize, but hopefully in their case, they want to destroy the core elements of a civil society and really of a civilization in many ways. That's why it was so obvious to me that this, if you want to talk about how, only, 20, 30, 40,000 Palestinians have been killed out of 2 million. That's already what? That's already, we're well over 1% of the population. If you want to talk about like the way they talked about 9/11 and October 7th, that's 3 million, more than 3 million Americans killed in a response to a quote unquote terror attack in 100 days. That is wild, just in terms of the nature of that direct human death and carnage. But of course, people, and especially propagandists, love to say, that it's only if you kill everybody is that considered a genocide. But if you go read the actual legal architecture of international law in terms of genocide, it says in part or in whole actions toward this, this end. And the way I've always considered it is that it is the long-term project of the Zionist operation before and then including after the formation of the state of Israel of a national genocide of the Palestinian people. And that's why they linguistically try to genocide the Palestinian people who are citizens in Israel. They will never call them Palestinian Israelis. They will always call them Arab Israelis. And so this is really the epicenter of the long-term, Zionist operation against especially the Palestinians. But it is also the case that the Israelis look like they were involved in the post-Iraq invasion theater in Iraq in terms of there was massive targeting of Iraqi intellectuals, Iraqi scientists, Iraqi institutions. And we know, very well now it's not pervasively known as it should be, but even people like, Robert Fisk, the late journalist, wrote out how it was pretty obvious that it was the Israeli advisors who were the ones who architected the torture program in Iraq.
That, and I've always wondered, this is not quite a tangent, but there's a element to where, like, you think about even like the mercenary groups, the Blackwaters, and then was there another angle or element to this that was left out of those narratives, much like the prison torture narrative? I'm not sure, but I think it's an interesting question to ask.
Yes, and it was in terms of, as if I remember this correctly, in terms of Fisk's reporting, that this came down to, I think, a contractor, an American contractor. It was either Titan or Khaki C3, something in that realm, being operating under the advisement of Israelis that were crucial to that. And so then just back to Gaza, that what are the key pillars of a civilization and a civil society? Obviously, it's, first and foremost, existentially hospitals, especially with a population of so many young people in terms of Gaza and so many pregnant women and newborns and all of that. And then you have the schools. And some of these are very long-term institutions, very important institutions in the entire region. And so you have the targeting of the hospitals, the schools, and then what I didn't mention was that obviously the Israelis have been targeting press. They've been targeting the Palestinian journalists, just murdering them, like, dozens and dozens of them. And so over time, we've gotten less and less information directly from the ground in Gaza as this operation has, quote unquote, progressed.
I think that was a very, I really appreciate the kind of full circle you brought there with the intertwining of these respective events together, as far as like these operations of influence. I think that was, I really appreciate that. And then bringing in the angle with, Iran, Russia, all the way to the even more domestic potential means of these just disgusting operations that are used in terms of using water as a weapon, et cetera. And so I think, and even going back, Jeremy, to where we were at the start with bringing in like Code Pink and Nancy Pelosi and all this, like once again, as we begin to wrap up here with this particular recording, it brings me back to and this is all of this, like these questions, these geopolitical questions, even the question of elements of the domestic resistance as far as to the ongoing mass slaughter that's taking place, and then in addition to the historical occupation, or even as well as the narrative framing of like what is the truth about like the resistance, and then even the question of bringing in like a group like Hamas, and which is where this, I think a lot of this results from, is that it's Pelosi, and then I guess also there's a clip of Bill Maher on his most recent show with Adam Schiff. So there's quite a tandem, along with the Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, where the young people they're being brainwashed into loving Hamas, and it's all this foreign funding and all this. I don't think Bill Maher was specifically saying that the way that Nancy Pelosi was, but it kind of figures into this, and so it brings me back once again to where we've talked about this, and we're going to really dig in, I think, to this whole angle of Code Pink here going forward, and some of these other elements, the Nation magazine, et cetera. We mentioned James Bamford earlier, and where we really need nuanced discourse and deep political truth to try to understand, what is the truth about, and the fact that you can't even what is the truth about some of these anti-war, anti-imperial groups that are out there that seem to be, they're sounding off the right things about, we shouldn't support mass murder, obviously, but then also into this direction of similar to post 9/11 with some of these groups of like staying away from the deep politics and looking more at the combination of blowback and just being against war and all of this, but like ultimately, and I think there's still a key factor of leaving so many deep political realities and deep political questions out of these, that now I think in a heightened moment like this, it's probably been the case all along, but now in more recent years, as we've seen this combination of the continued twin pillars of the culture war and terror war on a domestic and on a global geopolitical scale, of the increased need to have serious conversations about like the obvious foreign, obvious hostile interest entities that not only a Nancy Pelosi or maybe an Adam Schiff or people of that nature represent, or these neocons we talked about earlier, these Lindsey Graham types, but then also even the people who are on both, quote unquote, the right and the left. I mean, there was even pointed out in this SourceWatch article he sent me of this friendly exchange between Marjorie Taylor Greene and certain members of Code Pink, and this horseshoe of like where these anti-imperial, anti-war interests, I think one is more on the surface much more genuine and legitimate than the other, like in terms of like I think as far as like the type of anti-war rhetoric you get from the Greens and the Donald Trumps, et cetera, as opposed to like maybe your more traditional kind of left-wing anti-war activism. But even outside of that, like there's these questions of like where does the truth begin and end about potential nefarious, maybe in some cases there's some questions about domestic foundations, which has been kind of the traditional funding of like the of elements of progressive movements, anti-war movements, and all the things that come along with that, such as climate and economics and certain movements in a multitude of areas, now combined with now the increasing, much like we've seen, like obviously with the right, you've seen the increasing, and it hasn't quite taken over, I don't think, like the body politic of the entire Democratic Party, or maybe it has it a different way through maybe just more, there's much more overt, certainly, Israel lobby influence there, but not quite to the level of like where I don't think like where the entire GOP under Trump has just been like, is this where we've seen the depths of like this obvious like foreign compromise. But in the moment we're at now, like you have to look at the combination of not only the obvious bad actors in Congress, but then also like who is leading and shaping and influencing financially and otherwise these anti-war, anti-imperial voices that are now kind of increasingly in some ways indistinguishable from each other. You even think about Glenn Greenwald and Alex Jones being aligned, or Jimmy Dore and Alex Jones being aligned. I believe that is also interconnected with some of these dynamics. The increasingly, in some ways, indistinguishable, left and right elements of like the flanks, and the question of foreign influence, and like where exactly does it begin and end? Like we can't, we have to be more nuanced than just like it doesn't matter because Nancy Pelosi and a right-wing Zionist, very much a weaponized outlet like one you sent, Jeremy, of like this detailed article about CodePink and its and some of the problems with it. Like it can't be dismissed because it's obvious bad faith operatives that are leading there. But then you have to even ask deeper questions, like what we went back to earlier. Like, is there some kind of even very, very strange type of even at a deep level, maybe through things like bringing the Malibu Mafia into question, or even some of the West Coast Democratic Party type of interests that have. Or is there even some type of ultimate, real strange type of connecting of advancing certain narratives going on even between like these supposed not only extremes of like the right and left as far as these flanks of what are seen to be anti-war, anti-imperial, anti-establishment narratives, but then also even between like a Nancy Pelosi who was so problematic in terms of holding down and holding back so much important, I think, information and leads, like not only in the Bush days with inquiries into the heart of the Bush administration and certain impeachment inquiries, but also in the age of Trump, everything from questions of, all roads lead to Putin, but let's not look at the oligarchical cash flow, all the way to holding down or standing down psychological professionals who could have really shed light into the questions of Trump, which then ultimately serves the purpose of really being key in her position as Speaker of the House and concealing so much information I think could have been central. So you have to wonder, like, ultimately between like, Pelosi serving this obvious hostile foreign element in her role as like basically the de facto leader of the Democratic Party in Congress, and then this other element of other ostensibly much different foreign interests also playing a role in terms of really shaping these the discourse that's going forward, and certainly now in an aftermath of an event like 10/7, the questions of both the long-term and short-term failure of, I think, CodePink and many other groups to really get to certain deep political realities, and instead, I think, ultimately doing a disservice to people who really want to see a different direction outside of like these obvious global terror war and all that comes with it. So I've said a mouthful here. I hope this makes sense, but this is something I think we started out with, we really want to delve into and try to make sense of this, because I think the facts of this are really, really instructive in a moment like what we're trying to figure out here with the accusations of, and the way even like the glorification of Hamas is used to vilify and villainize the Palestinian solidarity cause. Are people playing into that intentionally in some cases, unintentionally in other cases? These are all very important questions.
Very much so. And because we don't have the time to deeply go into this area, which I think we should continue to go down this area and really, really like dig up what's going on here in terms of the Pelosi versus Code Pink sort of horseshoe, I would say clean break war operation of some sort going on there, at least on the surface, if not even in a deeper way. Or, as you brought up, this question of Adam Schiff and Bill Maher versus what they call now the October 7th denialists, that they then hooked in with the 9/11 truthers. And specifically, it's basically it's sort of like if you have Nancy Pelosi versus Code Pink, in one theater of battle on the quote-unquote left or amongst the Democratic milieu, you then have Adam Schiff and Bill Maher versus Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal of the gray zone in terms of the question of the Hannibal Directive in relationship to October 7th. That they're calling the October 7th the denialists, the questions of rape or baby beheadings and all of this kind of question. And it is very interesting that, Schiff would be the other key character I think that you could point to in terms of Congress under the Trump years, parallel to Nancy Pelosi, who was crucial to helping stand down a deeper investigation in terms of where all the roads that led to Putin actually ended up. How many of those roads maybe even started via the connection to Netanyahu and Tel Aviv? And of course, Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi, both key Zionist figures in all of this. And so and before I just give my final sort of too long didn't read in terms of Pelosi v. Code Pink of where we will go, and obviously we're not going to be able to deal with Bamford and the Nation. That's another really deep question, not only the Bamford and his article around October 7th, which is a total, what a fraud it ultimately ends up being about. I'll just give the two TLDR of that. He basically gives a ton of important information that he has helped bring out in his book Spy Fail. Much of it was already known. He fleshes out a lot of the details in a helpful fashion in terms of the Canary Mission operation, Adam Milstein, Adelson, Netanyahu, the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, the attack on American campuses and American politics, while also having supplied direct some amount of receipts for Isaac Molho, I think his name was, in terms of Netanyahu's fixer, consigliere, who was crucial to Netanyahu's involvement in the Trump 11/9 operation. But the whole article, which was actually put out, I think, beginning of November, basically why Israel slept. He gives out all of this important information in the background of like even Israel working with the South Africa and BDS and all of this stuff that's really, really important intelligence operations. What was going on with like the psychological warfare operations that then came into the 11/9 operation. Obviously, a lot of this we've been covering for 5 years. At least more than that in many ways. There's, I would say Seth Abramson's book, Proof of Conspiracy, in what published in 2019, sort of got the architecture of most of this. Now, it didn't have the details, but a lot of this was already known. We were basically saying, I'd heard that there was this Knesset member who had heard of Netanyahu's involvement in attacking the American elections to try to install Trump, and was very concerned about the potential blowback of this. And so we had started talking about Israel and Netanyahu's direct involvement in helping the 11/9 operation be successful and install Trump since basically almost day one in terms of the Trump years. And so there's this other aspect that we'll obviously get into where, Bamford is sort of leading a movement with the banner of all roads don't lead to Putin, all roads lead to Netanyahu, and only Netanyahu to some large extent, right? So there's this whole dynamic that we've dealt with in many, many ways, how the Putin-Netanyahu axis that involves others in the Middle East, obviously, MBZ, MBS, Al-Sisi, and all these elements there, that dynamic is actually used to cover up the totality of the operation from one side or the other. We've talked about that in terms of Nancy Pelosi and Adam Schiff ad infinitum during the Trump years. So after he goes over some of these very crucial facts, some of which he's sort of maybe the original reporter on, some of which he's just sort of repeating with a little bit more detail, the whole nature of the article, the headline, Why Israel Slept, the long catalog of intelligence failures that allowed Hamas to stage its brutal surprise attack on October 7th, begins at the Venetian, Sheldon Adelson's Las Vegas report. And basically, I don't actually see any evidence of how these operations, by the way, have been going on for decades in the United States. We've been covering the large swath of these operations of Israel attacking the American body politic, civil society, the spying, the assassinations, the terrorism. Obviously, Bamford's a key guy who limits the hangout on 9/11 and who all did it and why. But when it comes down to it, there's absolutely no there's not even an argument that he makes about how this all this Sheldon Adelson, Operation Butterfly, anti-BDS, Ministry of Strategic Affairs operations via Adelson in the United States, then sort of took the eye off the ball on the Gaza border fence. And then I'll just then read the last, here's the last paragraph, and there's a final sentence. And it basically sort of goes into an interesting amount of like how difficult it is for U.S. counterintelligence and FBI especially to root out these Israeli espionage and foreign agent operations, which is obviously very true and escalating. And there's a lot more that we'll have to get into, too, in terms of the resurgence of the question of Ann Neuberger, who we've been talking about for a while, who's this crucial character in the middle of all this at the sort of heights of, of cyber defense. And there's a lot there that we'll get into. And then after all of this stuff that's sort of like already been notoriously known about, like, amongst us people who have done some self-education, especially during the Trump years, he goes to, quote, "Over the years, as Israeli intelligence increased its secret war on innocent Americans, it likewise paid less and less attention to Hamas. Relatively quiet behind the high walls and barbed wire in Gaza, they assumed that its members had become docile and submissive. A minor outbreak, and they would simply send in the guns and armored personnel carriers and, quote, mow the grass, unquote. Early on that morning of October 7th, Israelis paid a terrible price for that mistake," unquote. And that's the end. That's all that the connection is made. There's no explanation of any of the questions that basically, for example, I put out publicly on X in terms of a litany of questions, basic questions about intelligence failures, TM, security stand down, Inc., and that on all that forensics has just built up since October 7th, especially in an Israeli context. And this reminds me a lot, this whole milieu, everywhere from, the Code Pink people to Nancy Pelosi, obviously, to Adam Schiff and Bill Maher, to the gray zone, Aaron Mate and Max Blumenthal. There's a certain, I would say, a certain positions that they all hold about all of these events. And Bamford's involved in this too. First of all, 9/11. Let me just assert, I think this guy, Netanyahu, this genocidaire, this international criminal of the most brutal sort, Benjamin Netanyahu, I see him as at the epicenter of 9/11/01 and October 7th, 2023. In both macro and micro logistical context. Now, I'd say we don't know as much about the micro logistical involvements of Netanyahu, both in terms of 9/11 and October 7th. But obviously Netanyahu just did an interview with Douglas Murray, where it's basically his New York Times September 12th, 2001 moment for October 7th. Remember, Netanyahu was quoted the day after September 11th as basically saying it's very good. And he was asked, what is this going to do for the relationship of the United States and Israel, or for Israel's position, or for your quote unquote national security position? It's very good. That was what he blurted out, right? And then he sort of backpedaled a little bit, tried to diplomaticize it a little bit, but that's what he really thought. And he basically tells Murray the same thing, that he was concerned about Hamas. He wanted to take out Hamas, but he knew that the Israeli public wouldn't go for sort of losing soldiers and stuff like that until something like this happened. So he basically, this is, of course, much more delicate because it's not in another country. It's in his own country. So now we're talking treason here. We're not just talking about terrorism and war crimes against civilians. If you're talking about the Netanyahu perspective on 9/11 against Americans, you're talking about treason, right? If you're talking about Netanyahu, wanting this to happen or facilitating it in any way. Anyway, that includes the long term in terms of the Hamas gambit, in terms of preventing the two-state solution or dividing the West Bank from Gaza politically, or all of this. And that goes way deep, and we'll continue to unpack all of this. But what all of these people have in common is they will not assert anything close to what I just asserted, whether about 9/11 or October 7th, right? And that is to a one of them. There's nothing going on in terms of, Israel did this. The closest you get is with like the gray zone people fleshing out the question of the Hannibal directive being deployed under mass Hannibal on October 7th, of where it's now obvious that the Israeli military killed many, many Israelis on October 7th. But they still won't go there on the question of the sort of nature of the attack being facilitated itself and all of the obvious quote unquote intelligence failures and stand downs and all of that. And so finally, wrapping up, Greg, I just wanted to mention, I forgot to, close the circle, obviously, as usual, on the question of why this moment to me is similar to the post-Soleimani assassination, right in that realm of the shoot down of PS 752 under the guise of what I believe was a very likely an Israeli cyber attack via Russian backdoored Iranian Tor M1 missile defenses. And the one forensic piece, and I did hear a U.S. military analyst and veteran say it had not been described to his. He said he found it confusing or sort of weird that this drone that came in successfully to attack the American barrack at Tower 22, that the way that it seemed to have gotten through was via a failure of the ID system, okay? And I've seen some aspects that might point to that this could have been even Israeli software that were part of the defense system in terms of these, again, we're right back to friend or foe ID kind of cyber jobs going on here. So my sense of it, and we'll flesh this out more because there's a deep history here, obviously. We could even go back to the question of the Marine barracks bombings in 1982 and who all did that and why. But we are at this moment right now, and I'll just predict that there will be they're gearing up, the Biden administration is gearing up for a substantial response. But it's pretty clear to me that there is not going to be an actual attack on any Iranian soil. I think it's very unlikely that there will be even an attack on like an Iranian intelligence ship or any direct like Iranian military asset. There will probably be a coordinated and multi-layered attack on what are seen to be IRG associated proxy forces in that general region around Syria, Iraq. They will be very careful not to hit Jordan at all. So that's my sense of it. And then finishing up the TLDR of Pelosi versus Code Pink. And you reference this article. It's called influencewatch.org. I believe it's very
Influence Watch. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very Zionist, very right wing. It's sort of under the guise of anti-communist influences.
Yeah, it's through a group called the Capital Research Center, and it's it's pretty much in that direction.
And I think that it is very interesting, as you pointed out, Greg, and as we'll get into further down the road here, that they go into the funding, which is sort of it's very obvious. The Code Pink does have, it looks like at least about a quarter of its current funding comes from the direct, networks and foundations who are under the watch of Jody Evans, the co-founder of Code Pink's current billionaire tech husband, right? What's his name again, Greg?
Neville Roy Singham.
Yes, and Neville Roy Singham made a lot of his money. He sold his company actually right before a lot of this money that he got from selling his company began to be deployed in these foundation and political and geopolitical ways. He got a lot of his money from doing business with the Chinese sphere, the direct connections with elements of the Chinese ruling class. Okay, so it's very obvious, like at least a quarter of the money that is driving Code Pink comes out of these some kind of Chinese interest geopolitical networks that are going on. And then meanwhile, they totally leave out the previous era of Code Pink funding, which goes back to when Jody Evans was married to her previous tech billionaire husband, the Malibu Mafia, the so-called liberal progressive Zionist Malibu Mafia, Max Palevsky, who's a computer entrepreneur, basically a previous generation tech billionaire. And this is when I had direct interaction with her and Code Pink. And I'll point out that they were created right after 9/11, and that part of their co-founders were also were involved in United for Peace and Justice, which became the sort of frontline organizers of the anti-Iraq war protests. And meanwhile, what did we see there? There was a massive stand down by these direct elements of the question of who actually and all did September 11th and why. Okay. And that was under where I'm almost positive that there was a lot of money flowing via Jody Evans from her then current tech billionaire husband, who has since passed away, Max Palevsky, to Code Pink. And they were being run in a way, I think, to cover up very important questions about Zionist influence. So when Medea Benjamin rightly points out that Nancy Pelosi has all of this backing by AIPAC, hundreds of thousands of dollars, very true. She leaves out this question of where Nancy Pelosi just directly said that she would even if the capital of the United States were to crumble, our support for Israel would never waver. When
on
she
stage
was
with Haim Saban
and Chuck Schumer.
Yeah, and Chuck Schumer, yes.
Shomar, as he calls himself, the
Right.
the protector of Israel by God in the Senate, as Schumer said. So there's a very serious question here in terms, I think, of the partial truth that Nancy Pelosi spoke, while also covering up the aspects of the networks that Nancy Pelosi has served, very likely intergenerationally, as we pointed out, in terms of her father, the mayor of Baltimore, the relationship with very likely the Meyer Lansky Zionist Jewish organized crime syndicate. He's honored in Israel. And then she comes onto the scene and is a crucial. She's like, I would call her the Code Pink of Congress, crucial to making sure that there's no questions like Dennis Kucinich has stood down when he wants to impeach Bush and Cheney around 9/11. Things could get very, very uncomfortable when those kinds of questions get asked, especially for those that are trying to protect the Zionist aspects of September 11th and the war on terror more generally. So that's the TLDR of this whole sort of situation on the domestic front in terms of the left, specifically Code Pink and Pelosi. And there's more that we'll get into. Like, I want to do more analysis of the questions of like the new Jewish left. And I watched this film, Israelism, that's about the founder, I think her name's Simone Zimmerman, who emerges out of the Israel lobby and long-term sort of Hasbara propaganda training of Jewish young people in the United States, and emerges into wanting to actually take on what she calls the Jewish establishment's sort of slavish devotion to this military garrison warfare state and its ongoing occupation, and then Jewish Voice for Peace and all of that. So these are a whole sort of area where, we deal with the right in many ways, and then we also need to deal with the left at this moment too.
Absolutely. Nancy Pelosi is the Code Pink of Congress. That would get a lot of interesting reactions from a lot of people. So I guess my closing statement for this will be that one thing that has really escalated since October 7th, and I mean, this has been at play before. I mean, this is something that's not new, but I think it's really been kicked into high gear with the obvious infusion of Russian, more overtly Russian, but definitely multipolar, Jackson Hinkle types of like being the voices of being seen as like the voices for Palestine against the evil, against Israelis and their American Western partners in crime and all this. And is that there's an increased effort you have to be one or the other. Like you can be, and not all cases, but like, if you're, you can either be for Russia or you can be for Israel, or you can, you can't be for both Ukraine and Palestine, for example. And there's an increasing effort, I think, to really to make that the case. And I think that is really picked up a lot in the certainly since the events of October 7th. That's really there's been increasing, you have to be on one side or the other. Like you can't have a concern for both because of the way like the narratives are set up. And then also even going back to the question of China, it's interesting that now you've got you either have like two you can fall into two extremes basically, or like two particular directions. You're either like you're either seen as like being like pro defit China as Chinese government against like the opposition of the hostile opposition of the West and of the global whatever you want to call it. And then either that or you're militantly anti-China. And even questions of like, you get one side that will say that like, China's committing a mass murder, the Uyghurs are being genocided in China. And you'll get the other side of this whole thing, and maybe the more Code Pink gray zone adjacent anti-imperial circles that will say like, no, that's all just a witch hunt against China. And you can either be pro CCP or militantly anti-CCP in these very paradigm-speaking problematic directions. You either have to be, you can support the Anglo-Israeli Zionist world order, or you can support the Russian multipolar, that is seen as being anti-Zionist and anti-Western, Zionist global dominance or whatnot, using the Western system. And there's no, like, we talk about like trying to find like these middle grounds, these neither nors, like in the direction of, multipolar or corrupt unipolar moment. No, neither nor. It keeps you away from looking at things like, is there a possible third way outside of these, another way outside of like these, you're either seen as pro CCP or you're seen as really just going in this obvious direction of being like militantly anti in the way of like the, some of like the very Frank Gaffney types, which then again comes with its own questions, as we've talked about before. Or are you pro-Israel, or are you pro-Hamas, or are you pro-terrorist? And these types of way these narratives are being set up between the likes of Pelosi and people that represent her type of viewpoint, and then like the likes of some of these, seen as anti-war, anti-imperial groups, really are helping to lead the way and muddying the waters of like, there's that you have to go in one of these directions or the other, and there's really no middle way or other way out. And I think that we need to increasingly try to explore some of these other ways out, which would involve getting to maybe some of the nuanced, deep political realities and of what goes on with some of these paradigms that have been put in place, and these horseshoes that have been put in place that are both long-term and short-term, that increasingly become more and more, I think, clear and more important as time goes on. So you increasingly get put into these boxes, and I feel like there needs to be an increased rejection of that, or at least an understanding of that could lead to a rejection of like, okay, are you pro-CCP or are you anti-CCP? Are you pro-Israel or are you pro-terrorist? Are you pro-multipolar or are you pro-Anglo-Zionist world order? You have to, I think we really need to start moving outside of that. I think that some deeper discussions about some of these matters can maybe help to begin to do that.
Definitely. And as we wrap up here, I would just say on that important point, Greg, people might want to go back and find our recording from about maybe 5 years ago called The Double Bind, that deals with some of mainly about questions of speech and press for freedoms in relationship to some of these false narratives or false choices that were given, but also the larger geopolitics of all of that. And I think what you're asking is maybe the crucial political question of our age, probably internationally, but definitely in the United States of America, in terms of the intensity of the way our system has been constructed as left v right or Democrat versus Republican and all these kinds of things. So that dialectic, and I would say double bind, false choice kind of scenario is a mark of mind control and of a non-actually free-thinking political system. And so some of the answers will rest in people really learning how not only to think for themselves, but also then to articulate political resolutions and programs that go beyond these presentations that they're given of choose one or the other. And so somewhere in this nonpartisan or transpartisan potential political future may lie the resurgence, I think, of an actual American constitutional republic undergirded by a democratic we the people body politic. And I believe it still will very likely emerge out of this radical middle and grow from there. But we will see.
So, all right. I think with that, we will wrap it up here.
All right. Thank you very much, Greg, for taking the time today.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody out there. We appreciate you. Until next time, AnteDote, we are out.